Welcome to this week's message from Burwood United Methodist Church. Our message today is about a Sabbath healing. I'm Tim Wood, the supply pastor. I'll be bringing this message from the Gospel of John, chapter 5, verses 1 through 18. The setting for this story is Jesus during his public ministry. He's in Jerusalem because there's a Jewish festival being held there, and he makes a trip to an interesting place to perform an unusual act. So here's the Gospel of John, chapter 5, verses 1 through 18. After this, there was a Jewish festival, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, near the sheep gate in the north city wall, is a pool with the Aramaic name Bethsaida. It had 5 covered porches, and a crowd of people who were sick, blind, lame, and paralyzed sat there. Sometimes an angel would come down to the pool and stir up the water. Then the first one going into the water after it had been stirred was cured of any sickness. A certain man was there who had been sick for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, knowing that he had already been there a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I don't have anyone who can put me in the water when it is stirred up. When I'm trying to get to it, someone else has gotten in ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." Immediately the man was well, and he picked up his mat and walked. Now, that day was the Sabbath. The Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It's a Sabbath. You aren't allowed to carry your mat." He answered, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" They inquired, "Who is this man who said to you, 'Pick it up and walk'?" The man who had been cured didn't know who it was because Jesus had slipped away from the crowd gathered there. Later, Jesus found him in the temple and said, "See, you have been made well. Don't sin anymore in case something worse happens to you." The man went and proclaimed to the Jewish leaders that Jesus was the man who had made him well. As a result, the Jewish leaders were harassing Jesus since he had done these things on the Sabbath. Jesus replied, "My Father is still working, and I am working too." For this reason, the Jewish leaders wanted even more to kill him, not only because he was doing away with the Sabbath, but also because he called God his own Father, thereby making himself equal with God. Now, you would think that a healing would be a happy time, a time to celebrate, and certainly not a time of controversy. Yet this is one of 5 healings in the gospel that led to conflict. That's because those 5 healings were performed on the Sabbath. The Sabbath is what we would call Sunday today. In some religions, they observe the Sabbath on Saturday. In the 10 Commandments, it is to be a day of rest. After God's act of creation, God rested on the 7th day. That set an example for God's people. Let's set the stage for this story. The man who was healed was one of many people who were at the pool called Bethsaida. That name means house of mercy. The man had suffered from an unidentified infirmity for 38 years. The man and the others in the crowd were sick or blind or lame or paralyzed. The pool had 5 porches and was near a sheep market. The crowd of people were attracted to the pool because of its healing power. From time to time, an angel of God would appear and stir the waters. The first person to enter the pool after the waters were stirred would be healed of any disease. The man whom Jesus healed had been at the pool for 38 years, but never had been able to be the first person into the water. His basic life needs, such as food, somehow were provided, but because he could not walk, or at least not walk well, his only hope of being first in the water was for someone to carry him into the water. Apparently, though, in 38 years, nobody had ever helped him. This story of divine healing is unusual in many ways as compared to the other healings recorded in the Bible. Most healing stories end with the healing. In this story, the healing occurs near the beginning of the story and leads to other important events. In 12 of the 18 healing stories, Jesus healed a person or persons after they approached him and asked for healing. But in this case, Jesus approached the man who needed healing. Another unusual aspect of this healing was that Jesus asked the man if he wanted to be healed. The man didn't ask Jesus to heal him. He either didn't know anything about Jesus or was unable to recognize him. Jesus asked the man if he wanted to get well. You would think the answer would be a resounding yes. Instead, the man complained. Why such an odd answer? Well, first, the man thought perhaps the only way he could be healed was through the pool of Bethsaida. Also, we don't know how Jesus posed the question. Did Jesus say, "Do you want to be healed?" emphasizing the word want, or did Jesus say it in some other way? Could the man have thought that Jesus was questioning his motivation to be healed? Perhaps many people had questioned the man's motivation. After all, he'd been there 38 years. People might have thought surely that was long enough for him to have found a way to get into the pool quickly enough. Maybe he appeared too comfortable. His basic needs have been provided for 38 years. He had no responsibilities. He didn't work or have to support a family. But the man wanted Jesus to know that he indeed was trying to be healed through the only way he thought he could be healed. Perhaps he hoped Jesus would help him get into the water. He got a lot more than he expected. Jesus told him to pick up his mat and walk. The man immediately was healed. He did what Jesus told him to do. He had been restored to full strength and was able to carry his mat. Carrying a mat was considered strenuous enough to be considered work. This healing is unusual in that Jesus did not touch the man or speak a command to heal him. As I imagine how this happened in my mind's eye, as if I were watching a movie of it or even was there, I hear Jesus not just telling the man what to do, but commanding him. I don't hear Jesus using a normal voice. I hear Jesus using a commanding voice. I don't hear Jesus saying, take up your mat and walk. I hear Jesus saying, get up, take up your mat and walk. The man at the pool not only needed healing of the body, but a healing of the soul. He needed to put 38 years of self-pity behind him and move forward. Maybe he needed the kind of motivation that comes from a jolt, something sudden, unexpected happening in your life. When Jesus heals or restores the church or restores a believer, Jesus may give marching orders. Jesus will restore not only us, but restore our sense of purpose. Even if you find you are not capable of doing all you were once able to do, you can find purpose for what you can do. You can even discover abilities you never knew that you had. There's another healing recorded in the Gospels of which Jesus told a man to take up his mat and walked. Jesus healed a man who was paralyzed. He told him to take up his mat, get up and walk, and go home. But that's not what Jesus told the man at the pool. Jesus told him to walk, period. He didn't tell him to go home. He wasn't going to walk home. He was going to walk into trouble. He was going to run into the Sabbath police. The Pharisees and other religious authorities were on the prowl for Jesus. They felt threatened by Jesus. Their plan was to catch Jesus breaking the law and use that against him. Now, carrying a mat was work, so one shouldn't carry a mat on the Sabbath. But that's what Jesus told the man to do. Now, the man at the pool was a Jew, and he knew Jewish law. He knew that carrying his mat violated Sabbath law, but he did it anyway. When the Sabbath police, that is the Pharisees, confronted him, he said he was carrying his mat because he was told to do so by the man who healed him. He chose to obey Jesus instead of following Sabbath law. He chose to obey Jesus instead of doing what the Pharisees said. There's no indication that he backed off. He was telling the Pharisees that he was not going to do what they said. Why did he follow Jesus and not the law? Perhaps he reasoned if a man has the power to heal, he has authority over the Sabbath as well. Or could it have been the combination of the healing power and the authority of Jesus' presence? The Pharisees demanded the name of the man who healed the man at the pool, but of course he didn't know because Jesus had already slipped away. When he later learned it was Jesus, he told the Pharisees. Then the Pharisees confronted Jesus. They demanded an explanation for his acts of healing on the Sabbath. This wasn't the only time Jesus had a run-in with the Pharisees over healing on the Sabbath. There are 5 Sabbath healing stories in the Gospels, and each of those times there was opposition to the healings. Sometimes it was the Pharisees, sometimes it was other religious leaders. Jesus was not afraid to challenge the religious leaders on this issue. Early in his ministry, Jesus went to a synagogue where there was a man with a withered hand. The religious leaders asked Jesus if the law allowed a person to be healed on the Sabbath. Well, Jesus' response was to heal the man. The religious leaders then left and made a plot to destroy Jesus. On another Sabbath day, Jesus healed a woman who had been unable to stand up straight for 18 years. The synagogue leader got mad over that. But Jesus pointed out that they led their animals to get a drink on the Sabbath. Why couldn't the woman be healed on the Sabbath? He asked. Jesus even healed a man while at the home of a prominent Pharisee on the Sabbath day. Jesus said this to the Pharisees in defense of his actions. My Father is still working and I am working too. God is in the business of healing. God is working non-stop. God is not taking breaks on the Sabbath. So Jesus didn't take breaks either. If a healing needed to be done on the Sabbath, Jesus did it. In healing the man at the pool, Jesus turned a pitiful invalid into a man who was willing to defy the religious authorities. God is the author of creation. God also has the power of recreation, of healing, of restoration. The message of the Bible is that it is God's plan to rescue and restore humankind from the damage caused by humankind's rebellion against God. In the book of Revelation, chapter 21, verse 5, God says, "Look, I'm making all things new." In this case, God is not creating new things. God is taking what exists and restoring it to the level of its original creation. God is in the healing and restoration business. Someday God is going to make all of us new. I believe that God stands ready to provide healing of the soul to all who earnestly seek God. Like the man at the pool, God can heal your spirit, motivate you, and give you a mission. Thanks be to God. Amen.